Whoa, welcome, Habibis, Habibtis, and Habib and Bees. Even though like we only have two people and one of them is us, I think. We still count. Welcome back to Exchange, where we are just ridding ourselves of our chains, and we have an awesome guest today. Um, Palestinian activist Hamza from Oslo. Rachel, will you do the introduction a little bit better than I can, please?
Well, we can also just let Hamza do the introduction for
Oh, Hamza,
himself.
you can also do the introduction for yourself. It's
I'm Hamzé. I'm from Palestine, from the West Bank, a place called Jenin. Also raised in Jordan, in Amman. Uh, I've been in Oslo since for in compilation 2 years, but from this time I've been since January for almost a year. So I got into activism involuntarily, mainly. I'm actually in engineering, but I after the recent events, kind of everybody jumped into the train of activism to help as much as possible. And yeah, I've been working on the activism here in Oslo for the past year, helping with all sorts of actions and demos and initiatives. Basically, some are on the street, some are web based, some are information based, some are just let out your anger kind of thing. All sorts of activism toward Palestine and anti-Zionist activism, and in general anti-fascist. So yeah, I guess that sums it up more or
Oh
less.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you so much for joining us, Hamza. We're very excited to have this
So
conversation
glad that you're
today.
here. Yeah,
Yeah.
and maybe a little bit of background because we have kind of an entertaining like context that we met in. We met at an event that I was doing in Oslo in April, I think. But Hamza had this is so stupid, but it's so charming. But had discovered me or like seen me a couple months before, and I was known to him just as Ben Shapiro's anti-Zionist cousin. I am not Ben Shapiro's cousin, thank God. But yeah, and then we met and have been in touch since as I've gone back and forth to Oslo. So yeah, just so happy to have you here today. And I think we have, in my opinion, a really interesting set of topics that we want to go through. We come from different political contexts and different activist contexts. Also, even the difference between Norway and Germany is very pronounced in terms of the character of the movements and approaches to political organizing. So we wanted to talk about that, and then also pick Hamza's brain a little bit on the kind of understanding layers of occupation, which was something that he put forward, and I think is very tied into understanding how to organize, is having a really comprehensive view of what occupation really means in the everyday lives of Palestinians in Palestine, and also how that permeates to the outside in the diaspora. And understanding that in a sophisticated and thorough way also helps us to kind of better design and adjust our activist approaches. So that's a bit of what we have in mind for today. Do we want to do a really quick recap as to what we're doing at Exchange, like 1 minute, just for people who haven't been on yet?
Okay, yeah, we can. Do
I'll
you want
go
to?
really quickly. So
Okay,
Exchange
go.
is a brand new media platform that Karam and I launched a couple weeks ago. We have a lot of things in store in terms of political content that we want to produce, but our main principle is centering unheard voices, whether that's again in the diaspora or most importantly in Palestine and in Gaza. And given the propaganda and brainwashing that is so prevalent in mainstream media, we see it as a responsibility to contribute to elucidating the truth and providing a platform that amplifies the voices from the ground. So The name Exchange comes from our belief that we are all the subject of the chains of the systems that we were born into, and it is a lifelong process of breaking out of them and shedding them. And that's also what we want to do here, is by making a community that's also dedicated to that pursuit. So right now we have weekly streams, Sunday evenings, and we have guests coming on to talk to us, and that will evolve as we continue. But I want to go into the topics that we have kind of on the slate for today. So we'll talk about understanding layers of occupation and kind of yeah, I mean, how that kind of, as I mentioned, permeates into all aspects of daily life, and then kind of transition to how we create impact. So what kinds of interventions, what kinds of actions within activism, and particularly for Palestine, are relevant according to regional, local, and political circumstances and conditions. And I'm gonna hand it over to Hamza, but I mean, we're doing this in a way that it's a very active discussion and not so much an interview. So, but yeah, that was the initial topic that we wanted to talk about. So, how does the occupation impact everyday life in Palestine, from education to healthcare to infrastructure, etc.? Why don't we start there?
Yeah, I guess it's important to realize that the occupation in Palestine is different from, let's say, other aspects, is that it controls every resource that Palestinians have. Let's say you have water, electricity, transport, movement, schools, even the money coming in from the Palestinian Authority itself, for example, the West Bank, is all controlled and maintained by Israel. So the occupation is not just that is a military power that is existing in the West Bank. It's also a controlling facility to the lifeline of all Palestinians there, and that makes, by definition, it forces the Palestinian people to be completely dependent on Israel. And if they try not to be dependent on Israel, you get the same as you have in Gaza right now. So what happened in Gaza, the siege that has been going on for more than 18 years now, and of course, obviously, the genocide now. But even before that, all the siege, all the wars, is basically the direct result of people in Gaza not wanting to have to being governed basically by Israel, by the occupation force. And there's still, until now, obviously, the resources, the aid coming in is being controlled by Israel. That's why they invaded Rafah, and so on. So, and of course, this is in Palestine itself. When you go out in the global region, you have the other aspects, which is the propaganda and the alignment of interests to protect the Israeli occupation's name and control over any resources. So, as they say themselves, they have long arms that reach everywhere. So they attack any kind of resistance, even either inside the occupied territories or in Israel itself, or outside all over the world. Even like any resource of resistance or resource of even maintaining life is being actively attacked, and that comes on so many layers. That's why the idea of the layers of occupation happen, because everybody knows that there is an occupation or have a faint idea of the occupation, but they don't know the severity of that occupation and how it controls even the most simple aspects of the life of Palestinians, while at the same time not only occupying but also actively taking land and claiming it as part of Israel. Obviously illegal. Everything about this is illegal, but Israel doesn't care about illegal. So yeah, that was what we wanted to discuss today, which is trying to give an impact, trying to give an idea of how severe and how deep the occupation actually goes in Palestine, and how this depth controls the life of everybody, like my family included. Uh, People like anybody who lives there basically is forced between uh, dealing with Israel, basically either in trade or in work or so on, or working for the Palestinian Authority, which is, to be honest, kind of a puppets for Israeli control. And the recent events in the past week in Jenin specifically, they reflect that how resistance fighters in the West Bank are being attacked by the Palestinian Authority itself, and this has been
Can you
going
give
on
a
for a
tiny
long
bit
time.
of background on what's happening I mean, I assume that most people have heard about it, but just like a brief overview of the last couple weeks, at least in Jenin.
Yeah, I mean, there's been crackdown by the Palestinian Authority, obviously with Israeli intelligence. So what happens is basically the Israeli intelligence, which are some of them are part of the Palestinian Authority, um, would try to find any kind of resistance. And Jenin is famous for having resistance, especially like Sile village and the Jenin refugee camp. And usually, it's either the Israeli army would interfere directly, or they would send the Palestinian authorities goons to eradicate the resistance there. So obviously, the Palestinian Authority is part of the structural occupation that Israel is maintaining, and it's done in such a way that Palestinians themselves find it harder to fight the Palestinian Authority than they are to fight Israel, because with fighting the Israeli army, it's clear who you're fighting. But with fighting the Palestinian Authority, you're mainly fighting people that are basically uh, you don't want to push yourself to, because they are somewhat related to you, and that is one aspect of how surreal it is to be in Palestinian resistance, because they're using that aspect towards it, and they under of course the idea of we're trying to maintain peace. So they're forcing people to either, okay, you want freedom, then you have to fight your cousin, otherwise you have to shut up. And yeah, doesn't get more surreal than that.
So like I just want to point out to something that you said when you were talking about how the occupation forces Palestinians into a state of like dependency on the occupation itself. First, through the massive extraction of resources or the limiting of access to resources, that leads then Palestinians into like these kind of situations where you're like, I I don't want to work for my enemy, or I don't want to work for the state that is oppressing me, but I have no ability to work anywhere otherwise. Um, and I think we touched on this last week when we showed the video of the Palestinian, the ex-Palestinian Authority
Officer, right?
officer who was like, "Yeah, I can't do this anymore." And but it also, and we touched on how like these the way the occupation works forces you even to be like, okay, I either fight my brothers and sisters for to survive, or I don't survive. And the thing is, even if you refuse to fight your brothers and sisters to and join like the PA as the extended arm of the occupation is still fighting you every day. um so, and when you said like layers of occupation, um first I want to get some background on like you. So were you born in Jenin? Did you live in Jenin, or were you also diasporized from birth, so to say?
Yeah, I was there, and I was born in Jenin, but I lived also in Jordan. I moved in Jordan for school when I
Mm,
was very young. So yeah, I lived, like, my family is in Jenin, but I live most in Jordan.
mhm.
And then I was traveling as well in Europe and Asia and in multiple places for works and stuff, for work and studies. Uh, but mainly the most of the current info, because right now I haven't been to Jenin in more than 12 years now.
Cool. Okay.
So most of the information that I get from my family there.
Yeah.
My extended family is are all still in Jenin. So that's my direct contact there.
But also, I mean, you've said you haven't been for 12 years because, speaking of everything the occupation controls, maybe it goes without saying, but the process of getting in is absolutely miserable and
Mhm.
unspeakable.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the process of getting in for the ironic thing is, if you are a citizen of anywhere in the world, you can go to Palestine easily. But when you're a Palestinian, first of all, most of Palestinians are not like me. Most of, for example, Palestinians in Jordan, I was one of the very few ones who can actually go to Palestine. Most of them are banned from going,
yeah,
so they cannot go at all. And even people like me who can go, um, they go through multiple humiliating checkpoints, waiting for hours for no reason, just like to humiliate people. And that's on the border. After you go, there are multiple checkpoints that do the same.
yeah,
Sometimes humiliating searches and so on, strip searches even. Um, and that's just to get to where you live. If you want to go to Jerusalem, for example, there is a whole other process that you need to do. You need a specific clearance for Jerusalem, and you can't get it if you're anywhere anywhere under 50 years old, because they want to, like, if you're going there, they want you to be old, and yeah, that's the only way for a Palestinian to actually go there. But if you have any, like, for example, you if you have a German passport, you can go there easy any day, visit Jerusalem, do whatever you want, which is obviously ridiculous.
Unless you're outspoken against Zionism, in which
Oh yeah,
case you'd be
definitely.
muted.
In which case, you're
yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
understood.
the how ridiculous this is. Like when we say the occupation is literally in people's beds. Like uh, there are people who are married who if you are, I think, if it was like if you live in Jerusalem and you marry someone from the West Bank, only you can move to the West Bank. They cannot move to Jerusalem because Jerusalem is like an upgrade, so to say. And this is which means people, this can be a deal breaker for marriages. This can be a deal breaker for living in Jerusalem, which begs, like, which kind of lays it very clear, like what the goal is. The goal is to have less Palestinians in Palestine through the maintenance of this incredibly cruel apartheid system that is basically just there to reduce the amount of Palestinians living in historic Palestine slowly with time. Or if
Mhm.
we see the other the expedited form of it, that would be the genocide that is happening right now in Gaza. So the goal is just the same. The method is different. The speed is different. The goal is and remains the same.
Yeah, and look, I think something that we had mentioned in prepping for this was also the occupation of education. And certainly we can point to what's going on in Gaza and the fact that all of the schools have been bombed and children have been out of school, out of their educational processes for more than a year. And that is, of course, and all of the universities have been bombed. I think that's correct, right? Every single university in Gaza has been bombed because
Right.
everything in Gaza has been bombed. And it's, I mean, that's not just occupation, of course, that's the next level above occupation, which is systematic annihilation of every aspect of life and
Yeah.
every aspect that contributes to the reality of the next generation of Palestinians. Um, and I mean, can we talk about that in the West Bank also, like the occupation of education, and what that looks like? I don't. I mean, I know what's been going on in Gaza, but I think this is also part of the point is that as everything has gone on in Gaza, it's taken eyes away from the West Bank. But yeah, can we talk about education in the West Bank and how that's impacted as well?
I mean, in the West Bank, it's not very different from not just the West Bank itself, but also countries surrounding the West Bank, like Jordan or Egypt and so on, which is focusing so much on having basically diluting the idea of how Israel came to be I mean, of course, in Jordan, the education in Jordan, for example, would say clearly that, okay, like Israel was established, and Israel is obviously a colonial power and so on. Um, but it had very little emphasis on how it was established and how it's a direct extension of British colonialism, which is quite surprising in the education
Even
system.
in
Even
Jordan.
yeah, even in Jordan, for example, what most of, for example, in Jordan, you will get 10 lessons about the Arab Revolution. Okay, great. What happens after the Arab Revolution? There's one little paragraph that says, "Oh well, after the Arab Revolution, the British came in, and because they gave the Arab Revolution weapons against the Ottoman Empire, and they promised them freedom, but they kind of backed up on their word, and instead of giving freedom, they took over themselves." And this is mentioned very like without much emphasis. Why? Because Jordan is a friend of Britain
Yeah.
and
Mm.
France, and they don't want to basically antagonize anybody. But nobody's a friend of the Ottoman Empire anymore, so because it doesn't exist, so antagonize that as well at will. So they antagonized the Ottoman Empire for like 6 lessons, and then in history, and then one little paragraph about, oh yeah, the British and the French came, and they kind of cut the cake between the places, and there you have it. Then you have Israel. So uh, of course it can, like the Palestinian, the West Bank one, for example, it does the same in a more Palestinian Authority kind of thing. It of course involves the Palestinian Authority, Abbas, and so on. But obviously, as we, I mean, we knew from the start, but like it's more clear now than ever that the Palestinian authorities, they're just there to enact Israeli policies.
That's really interesting because I mean, obviously, understanding the cowardly and treacherous and not treacherous. What's the word? Traitorous regimes, surrounding Palestine. That's not surprising, but I'm still kind of yeah, I don't know. I can't help but be still taken aback by that. Um, it's still a very big contrast to my education, which I mean, they literally told us once there's no such thing as Palestine. When people say Palestine, they mean Israel. That was the lesson that I was taught. Israel was created in 1948, and it was a beautiful Independence Day. And ever since then, we've only had Israel, literally Nakba denial and the denial of Palestine even existing. Um, and then that was the extent of our education. We had no context on anything except like no education outside of European history. So that's interesting to me. Karam, what
Yeah.
was your education
So
like?
our education was, I mean, say what you want. Syrian education is quite good, I think, and I think I kind of also did not really. They sold us a lot about like how socialism is the best and stuff like that, and they kind of like talked to us in the language that was good, in like the very very awesome language, but at the same time you were like, hey, like all the lessons you're teaching us about like how stuff is, and like egalitarian it sounds, you're not applying any of this, like my guy. you're you're talking to us about socialism while you are like one of the richest people on the planet. It's very on the nose, and not like the richest people on the planet, the richest people on the planet because of exploitation of the your working class. um but I wanted to also talk about like how it is in the West Bank, as like as I've seen like people that I know, especially regarding like education. It does not have a high priority, not by the Palestinians, but by Israel itself. Like if they decide, oh, today we're doing raids, they just do raids, and if you're going to school, you have to go back to go back home. I think there was like a very iconic picture from like a year ago or something when they started doing raids in the West Bank in Al Khalil, I think, and the child was like holding his backpack and is like, where do I go right now? And from what I've heard from people, and also my my old podcast host, who was born and raised in Al Khalil, he told me like you they can just decide, okay, the school is now raided, you have terrorist children, and they just arrest children that are like as young as 10 and 12.
Yeah.
um and I think because Israel is the only state in the world that that tries children in front of a military court, you can only imagine what huge of a toll that takes on like the education or on the psyche of the next generation that is like easily just put in cages. Um,
Yeah, and I think, sorry, did you want to?
no, that was it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and I think also you see the actual education that takes place and the level of, I mean, the sophistication around all of these educational processes as such a triumph and such an aspect of steadfastness and resistance. I mean, I just remember when I got in touch with my friend Mara, and she was telling me about her life and her, I mean, exceptional level of education. I, made the comment, "Your English is exceptional," and she was like, "Well, what do you think?" Of course, I speak English. We have the best education system in the world here. And I was like, well, I mean, that wasn't like it wasn't a comment on the education system as much as just it's massively impressive. But of course, when you see the scientists and poets and artists and everything coming out of Palestine, in this case out of Gaza, they clearly have a target on them. And you've seen that in this escalation in the last 14 months of the genocide. Anyway, but so I wanted to kind of, we've talked about certain aspects of this, and I think what I found interesting in broaching this topic, layers of occupation, is ultimately how it leads to our responsibility and possibilities for us in organizing. So the connection to the next piece is, how do we take an understanding of these layers of occupation and use it to reach people? And something that I found really compelling in thinking about this is that it's kind of dark, but there's something for everyone here, because the occupation is in every aspect of life. Whether it's healthcare, you go to it, you go to doctors elsewhere and say, here's what your life would be like, and here's how your profession would look if you were in this context, or education, or environmental capacities or anything. There really is something to connect with everyone in their area, and that's something that I think we, at least in my experience, I don't think we're doing that enough. And it came to mind also because of this event we had a few weeks ago with iGen, who I'm organizing with, and we had a doctor from the UK, South African doctor. Actually, we're going to have him on the stream sometime next month. And he's South African and was active in the struggle in the, the movement against apartheid in South Africa many decades ago. And he's been going around and educating on healthcare conditions and medical conditions in Gaza for the last 14 months, and how it's not just impossible to practice, but it makes you a target of the murderers and the genociders. And ultimately, I saw at this event, we had a bunch of really amazing speakers, but when he spoke, and he spoke about the specifics of the way medical people in the medical profession are targeted, people really responded to it. And we had people who are also in the healthcare profession here in Germany come up to him, and they wanted to connect with him, and they wanted to think through how they could organize around that, because that's something that matters to them. And we've seen that with Qasim as well, our friend who's a doctor from Gaza, has been in Germany for many decades. When he gives these presentations, people really respond, because it's something just a little bit more concrete that they can place in their lives, in their context, and yeah, it's a different process for them. So I don't know if you have other example, like, that's just really interesting to me though, because that's an area and like a tactic of organizing that I think can be very strongly utilized.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, organizing in this regard, we have, for example, here the one of the most, as you said, like the medical aspects. One of the most famous people here in Norway is Mads Gilbert. You probably heard about him. And he is a doctor, and he served in he worked in Gaza, he worked in Syria, he worked in Lebanon, in multiple places, all affected by Israel. Obviously, I mean, they're keeping him busy. And there's other doctors and journalists also, because they reflect, first of all, the reason why people like him are famous is not only because he's obviously himself is a well-spoken guy, and he has amazing energy and amazing spirit, which gives him an extra boost. But not just him, because all Norwegian doctors who actually served in Gaza reflect a very direct picture to the Norwegian people, and that picture comes from a familiar face, which kind of gives us a lesson, to be honest, on how we can give an idea to people here or in Germany, for example, because they need, first of all, they need a familiar face, not the stereotypical face that they see every day in the news. They need someone they can trust, to give that idea to them in a way that, okay, yeah, what like they can see in their eyes the full severity of what's going on there.
Who speaks their
And
language as well. I mean, that's
exactly, yeah. I mean, so whether we like it or not, uh, we need to kind of, in our organizing, we need to kind of adapt to that. Of course, obviously, it's not fair. It's not really fair that, oh, why you listen, for example, to that guy, not to this guy. Well, we all know why, because people are, kind of years
racist.
of
Racism, yeah.
and a lot of people don't realize it, that they have it themselves. And but that's fine, because most people are indoctrinated to have that problem within them. I mean, that's again the problem with the education system. uh, but instead of just saying, our responsibility is that, instead of just saying, oh, that's not fair, we shouldn't care about this, we should actually adhere to reality, and, well, start giving it some bias, giving it some thought.
I mean, I
uh,
think we should utilize it. It's not like we should succumb
exactly,
to it. It's not like we
exactly,
should say, "Oh, it's okay." We don't need to
of course.
scream at people that they're racist, but pointing out, like,
No,
this is how I mean, at least how I strive to use my privilege, like by getting out in front of people and saying, "Oh, you're willing to listen to a Jewish person. Why do you think that is? What makes it so I'm so much more credible? I've been active for less than 2 years in this movement. Um, I think there's something going on here. You need to, do a little bit of introspection there. But that's also what I really love about Mats Gilbert, because his politics are so, I mean, just rock solid, and he has the experience and the like profession to back it up, but he uses it in a really intentional way. And I've seen him go on and give talks, whether they're in Norwegian or English, and just say, my good friends, my colleagues, like, they are here suffering, and the only reason why they're suffering and why I'm not is because I'm not allowed in, and because they're not allowed out. And there is something really, really powerful to hearing that from people. But I think that's where this is a question of, how do we actually combat racism? It's not by accepting that that's the way things are and just giving people an easy out by saying, okay, yeah, you only need to listen to these people who are white, or you only need to listen to these people who speak your language. But it's by putting people in front, which is also why, by the way, sorry, I'm getting very activated about this, which is, by the way, why I can't stand these breaking the silence people and these JVP people, because what do? They get up in front of you and they claim the stage and they make it their platform, and they don't actually elevate or center Palestinian voices, or challenge the framework in a way that will leave a lasting impact. They just say, oh, this is my space, and we know that you're going to listen to me because I'm white and I'm Jewish and I'm Israeli and I'm a former IDF soldier, which really should discredit them from ever speaking on a public stage for the rest of time. But that's why I think also people like Mats Gilbert and people with sound political principles are so key in this process of breaking out of the chains, if you will. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's also like, it has, like, yes, we do say racism plays a big role, yes, but it's also not just racism. We have the power of language in itself to be able to speak to someone in their language opens uh, a small door that they have inside their brain where it's like, oh yeah, this is normal, this conversation is normal regardless of what the content of it is, because it's in their language. It fits the comfy space where where their mind operates in. um but it's on us, I think, to see, okay, these are how society, these are things that we can criticize about society, but these are things that we can also utilize, which is why you see me the whitest Palestinian to ever walk the earth, like whiter than how Germans think Jesus looked like. That's why I'm also speaking. I don't look like how a normal Palestinian should look like. So yeah, or how I don't fit in the image of how Palestinians are drawn in the head of well, of
No,
normal
you're
of
confusing to them. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
probably they don't believe you if you.
I
Well,
swear to
people
God.
try and go up to Karam in the street and say like horrific,
Yeah,
racist, vile shit to
yeah,
him
yeah,
about refugees and about Muslims. And
yeah,
they're like, hello.
yeah. It's always funny to see the switch up when like the name is when I tell them my name, they're like,
What?
yeah, it's like it goes
Oh,
from this to
Oops.
yeah, like are you sure? Yeah,
well,
but
I mean, so this is also something that interests me though, because I think there's definitely an element of these aspects of like I don't know, xenophobia, certainly, however you look at it and anywhere. But this was a this is a shift for me, even in having spent time between Norway and Germany, because there is a different character around the way that people relate to racism, the way that people relate to the other and how people are considered the other. I mean, not to boast, but I mean, look around in Germany and look at the phenomenal work they do in othering anyone who isn't white and blonde and Aryan. It's just it's unprecedented. No one can really touch them. At least that's my feeling living here, and that's certainly their feeling about themselves. Um, so in that respect, and they also have a real righteousness around language in a way that I think is very inherent to and characteristic of colonizers. Norway, even in the even in the willingness of people to speak English, I think there's a little bit of a different character. So I think certainly there's an appeal in organizing in the native language of the country you're in. But even in Norway versus in Germany, I think there's a different approach to that. Like Norwegians don't have such a hang up about language. I I don't know. Like, what has your experience been like in Oslo as a non-Norwegian speaker? Or I don't want to put you in that bucket. I know you speak Norwegian, but as a non-native Norwegian speaker, I assume largely doing activism in English.
I know. I mean, as you said, like what you said is quite right in terms of Norway being quite different from Germany in terms of accepting language and accepting people. But of course, that changes whether where you are in Norway. For example, Oslo is more accepting than other places. But in general, I would say the Norwegian people are more accepting to minorities and non-Norwegian speaking people. For example, I had no troubles, although my Norwegian is still relatively quite weak. But because I've been here a little so little time, it's partly because the reasons behind it is that partly because as you said, Norwegians are not hung up on the language. They all learn English quite like you find little kids speaking perfect English. The education system is much better here as well for multiple reasons, uh, and the let's say the ratio of the margin of acceptance is different. For example, the ratio I think in of refugees in Germany are much larger than it is here. And of course, the lenience of the far right, leaning on that is less here than it is in Germany,
Mm.
and that of
Right.
course impacts civil opinions about the look towards an immigrant, or the look towards anybody who doesn't speak, let's say, German or Norwegian, and so on. Uh, so yeah, that's part of it. But I've lived also. I tried Berlin itself and Oslo, and there's a huge difference between Oslo and Berlin. Even in the very short time I've lived in both.
So, and this is something that, so that's really interesting to me. And that also, I mean, and having spent quite a bit of time in Oslo in the past year, and seeing significantly more Palestine solidarity just as kind of like a mainstream eh, fundamental aspect of society that just doesn't exist here. Also, the lack of this really hyped up obsession with anti-Semitism. Um,
Mm.
it makes the movement there very different. I think it makes the work very different. And when I came there and I screamed about Intifada at the at the rally, clearly I got a very different reaction. Or even when I tried to do a few Arabic chants, and people like largely didn't respond. Um, it's a different challenge, and that was
Yeah.
something that even in the time that I've spent there, I I haven't really had analysis around. That's been difficult for me to crack. How do you approach a population, first of all, who just doesn't really escalate because of the I don't know, nature of kind of harmony within society. Also, they are very homogenous, all of that. Um, but also people where their floor to the whole Palestine solidarity question is so much higher in Germany. I mean, in Germany, you're really starting from like negative numbers.
Yeah.
People are by default silenced and intimidated into not showing any solidarity with Palestine. But when we marched through Oslo at the demo when I was there a few months ago, everyone came out. People came out of the stores and they watched and they filmed, and some of them chanted along with us. You just don't have the same stigma around being supportive of Palestine. Certainly, there are Zionists, and people aren't all supportive of Palestine. But for me, because there's kind of a different gap between, like in Germany, you have the majority of people who are silent, and then you have the small minority of people who are like, we have to get the German money out of weapons deliveries. That's a really big jump to make, versus in Oslo or in Norway, that jump between, yes, I can be like solidarisch with Palestine, but getting them to the next level of like, okay, what am I going to do about it? That seems to be like a really central challenge for me. How do you approach that in the movement there?
Yeah, I mean, like it basically. Usually, I imagine it as a scale of. I don't know if that or does it
The
show,
X and the Y.
but basically there is the scale of, let's say, knowledge versus reaction. It goes like this. So you have people start gaining knowledge on the actual problem of Palestine, and the more knowledge they gain, the more reaction they would have, and then the more willing they are to participate in any kind of activism or any kind of solidarity movement. Um, that level of knowledge between Norway and Germany, for the average, on average, let's say, is very different.
Yeah.
So the starting point for Norway is that they already have much more significant knowledge than it is in Germany. For example, here, yes, they don't learn that Israel, let's say, is committing massacres, but they do learn how it was established. They
Hmm.
don't. They do learn that yes, Palestinians were expelled in 1948 and 1967, and they do understand that the West Bank is occupied. So, and of course, there is the admission that Palestine, existence of Palestine, which happened recently. So all that kind of lifts people's knowledge scale to a higher extent, and so they're willing to participate is higher.
Hmm.
Now, that in contradiction to also Norwegians, people in general are, there is even a term for it, basically they try to fit in. So you won't expect the majority of Norwegian population to be very willing to be radicalized, for example,
Hmm.
because they all want to basically be more fitting into the society. Uh, so you would have the reaction that you got when you talked about Intifada, for example. But that doesn't mean, I mean, that they are unwilling to participate. They're willing to participate in more subtle reactions. Of course, that's not enough, obviously, but on average, it's still, let's say, it's still a better symptom of the movement than having a little bit of radicalization that doesn't actually reach the main bulk of society.
Mm.
So the main bulk of society in Norway does at least acknowledge Palestinian resistance and supports Palestine.
But
Do
this is
they
where I
do
have
anything about
trouble
it?
because I think the majority of society feels like they're fulfilling their responsibility by wearing a
Exactly.
keffiyeh, and that's
That's what I
fine
was.
because
Yeah.
that's different on the scale of radicalization. Wearing a keffiyeh in Germany, like you're called a Nazi. I mean, I'm called a Nazi when I wear a keffiyeh, which is psychotic. You actually have it is a political statement here versus in Norway, it's not such a political statement, which makes the bar higher for actually fulfilling your responsibility. And then that's a similar challenge. Like, how do you actually mobilize people and activate them to do something? I'm not yelling at you. I'm just yelling.
Yeah, and no, but in Norway, for example, I think the way to mobilize people is to make it to fit it to their to what they react to. So what most people here react to is something that is let's say subtle and appealing to their perspective. So do let's say a chanting demo, they wouldn't join it as much as they would, for example, an event with a nice speaker on chairs, comfortable, warm, fuzzy, that kind of yeah. So they if you hold that, and I've seen both sides, and you would find completely different faces of. For example, you do a demo, you would find a specific number of faces that you see in every demo. You hold an event with nice comfortable chairs and a nice speaker with nice sound systems and everything, you will find a completely different layer of people. You'll find a completely different audience.
Oh,
But
Both
my
okay.
of
question is, okay, so they're at an event. What do they do afterwards? And this is something that I've kind of,
Yeah.
my view on this has
mm,
shifted because I've spent, as I think I've said to both of you, most of the year saying, yes, we need to reach the masses. Yes, we need to like adjust our approach so we convince people because that's where our safety is. And in Germany, there is kind of there's an argument to be made for that because being out in the streets and being this exposed and this isolated and this criminalized is very dangerous. It's physically dangerous. The cops are attacking us. They're beating the shit out of us. We know this. Um, so that's fine. That's one thing. But ultimately, the people who are in the street and the people who are doing the events who are, like sitting there, yes, they're two different kind of cohorts. Who's making the most difference? Who is ultimately going to be the one to get the oil fund to divest from their illegal investments or whatever it is in the West Bank and 48 whatever? Who are going to be the people who ultimately do that? I don't see it as the people who are sitting in the nice warm event. And this is something that's really changed for me because I don't think that it needs to be a majority of the population or hundreds or thousands of people. I think it needs to be a core of people who really have a strategy. And this is also something that I'm coming to having joined this group where they said, oh, you're only 2 people in Germany, or you're only 3 people, or however many people we ultimately are going to be. That's fine. That's enough. And why is that enough? Because ultimately, if you have a really clear target, whether that's like a strategic defense campaign, whether that's something to attack narratives in the mainstream or anything else, how many people do you ultimately need to do that? And so I've been doing these panels, I've been doing these events, and I get to the end and I find like what impact has it really made? So I changed someone's day a little bit, maybe I made someone a little bit uncomfortable and made them question their worldview. What does that actually accomplish?
yeah, I think honestly, I think both are needed to in different scales. But what you need is not, honestly, I gave up on the idea that having numbers, it's not about numbers, it's about having impactful people. on your side. So we need impactful people that have the either privilege or power or money to push a certain idea. And that's what for example, that's what Israel is doing. For example, what Israel doesn't, because they simply don't have the numbers. But what they do, because they have impactful people, they go to organizations. For example, peace organizations, anti-racist organizations here in Norway, and to the Storting itself, to the Parliament of Norway, and they have reach because they have impactful people. So they talk to them in private rooms. That's not even a demo. That's not even a room with a speaker. No, they talk to them in private rooms. They tell them, oh, yeah, we as the Jewish community or as the Zionist community, of course, not the same thing, but they try to portray it as the same
Present
thing because they
themselves
want to
again.
have the Jewish shield around them.
Yeah.
Um, and they push and they have that speech with any members of parliament, impactful people, basically members of parliament, parties, organizations, and so on. And we've seen this. For example, they distributed flyers to each member of parliament, doctrining basically each aspect of how Israel and Norway should be friends and so on, and that reached all the members of parliament. That has, in such a small act that was done by one person, they had more reach than what we did in, let's say, a demo that was outside the parliament.
Yes, but at the same time, and I of course they do, but they also have the prevailing narratives of like everything that supports Norwegian financial interests and strategic interests, and they are, I mean, this is the ruling state of the world. This is the ruling class and the world order of genocide. It's not difficult to convince people of that.
Yeah.
Even if we were to do the same thing and had similarly impactful people who visit, and this is, by the way, if you believe in parliamentary politics or that it can accomplish anything, which I do not. If we had people do exactly the same thing and visit all those same people, it would still be a challenge in that
Yes,
respect. I mean, it's still,
because it's always easier to swim against the current, and if the current is like with the Western imperialist interest, or with the interest of producing more weapons that in the end give more oil contracts to your country, then yes, of course. I think the question that does not even need to be discussed, or like I think that we're kind of avoiding, what is the um the right strategy, because you're saying this alone doesn't work and this alone doesn't work. What do we think, what's the combination that we're looking for? Is it 80/20? Is it 50/50? Are we talked about education and how like we can also play a role in educating the masses. What is the perfect, in your opinion, if we're doing a perfect recipe for waking up the masses right now?
Where?
In
Norway has this
Oslo, let's
different
say in
dynamic.
Oslo, let's say in Oslo, because this is, or in Norway, because this is where your area of this is where your experience is. So
In Norway, I'd say the impact through the organizations and the demos. Uh, Demos right now are saturated because people have seen demos in Oslo for a whole year, and they're just seeing another demo. They don't even look at it. They're, oh yeah, it's just the Palestinian demo. Like,
they're
yeah.
also
it's,
not getting any pushback against it. They're not being attacked by cops, so there's no
yeah,
challenge like to demonstrate against. Sorry.
yeah, but the cops here will never attack the demo.
Exactly.
It's just they're not Nazis like. um, but basically the impact, I think, in the Oslo context would be more towards strategic organizations, that appeal, basically push narratives into the public, into news that people actually see, and so on. Because Oslo, let's say Oslo is done, we need to reach beyond Oslo,
Mm.
and demos cannot reach beyond Oslo because there are not enough people to mobilize demonstrations, for example. But what you can get beyond Oslo to people is well, any platforms, internet platforms, news platforms, and so on. So I think that's the missing link here in Norway. And of course, to the again, for the parliament aspect, You need to that's just different aspects of lobbying or aligning interests, and of course attacking, which was already done, attacking weapons manufacturers
Ooh, we're
like
coming to the
Nammo and
juicy stuff here
Kongsberg
now.
and so on, pushing those to stop, because those are the real reasons why Norway is very skeptical about divesting from the oil fund, for example. By the way, for context, the oil fund is the largest Norwegian fund, and they invest a lot in the Israeli
It's also the
company
largest sovereign wealth fund in the
in the
world,
world.
right? Yeah.
Yes, yes. And it's very impactful if Norway would de-invest, and they did for some companies, but not nearly enough. So that's the main thing that we're trying to push here in Norway, because if they do, then that's a real punch to Israeli investments, basically.
But so the question is for me, because I think, okay, so we've honed in on, how do we ultimately target our activism? What is it? It's economic interests. Okay, so the oil fund is invested in Israel, and Germany is delivering weapons. But do we actually need to target the masses? Do we need the masses to support something versus do we need to be hitting people in the capital and I don't know, through boycott, through whatever. I mean, I think a lot of these investments that the oil fund is um, has made is not necessarily something that can be boycotted per se, but attacking weapons factories, occupying, like there was this amazing action, and also I just saw it where they were occupying, was it Norges Bank or something? They were in the lobby, they were
Yeah,
yelling, and they were really causing a disruption. For
yeah,
me, how many people you need to do that? 20 people, and they caused a real fuss. And if more people just amongst that cohort were to be activated to do something like that, that to me is actually what you need far more than you need public opinion on
yeah,
your side. You need both. I know you need both. I'm a little bit just arguing for the sake of
yeah.
like pushing this point, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for example, Norges Bank, which is the bank responsible for the oil fund, which is the central bank of Norway, basically. There has been so many actions. I mean, we did, as you said, disruption inside multiple times. That the ones that you saw is, I think, the fourth time or something.
Mm.
I'm not even following how many times they did this. And there's also there was a camp for more than a month and a half just outside Norges Bank. People slept there day and night to demonstrate protest against the oil fund's investments. So there was lots of disruptions, lots of demonstrations, and so on. Uh, it's just that when the let's say person responsible is faced by two decisions, one from above, his boss telling him no, and a bunch of angry demonstrators in his lobby, he's gonna listen to his boss, because that's unfortunate, because that's the non-confrontal
Mm.
strategy that most people follow on. Most people will
But I
answer
should
to
like for
charge.
me, there's an aspect of, I mean, I completely agree with that clearly, but um, for me, that goes in exactly the right direction. And so now I'm at the point of, and I'm pushing this because I'm questioning my own views here, having done this fundamental argumentation of what's the difference between Zionism and Judaism, and what's the nature of the genocide in Gaza, and what's going on, and blah blah blah, trying to approach people who have no knowledge of the situation. And for me now, I feel like the people who are already activated and are at demos and are doing these softer kind of actions, to get them mobilized into the next level of radicalization, to say, instead of having 20 or 40 people, let's have 100 people on rotation occupying Norges Bank every single day, for like going into the lobby and occupying it every single day. How long can they really deal with that? And it's nonviolent. I mean, it's direct action, it's civil disobedience, but it's nonviolent.
Yeah, but like I think they tried at some point more than 6 months ago, but they just removed them. I mean, with the police, because there are laws against that. So they removed them in a nice way, but they
Yeah,
did.
yeah, yeah. But just
But they
as an
can't.
example, I
Yeah,
mean,
So yeah, but we also, like you said, Oslo is done. Were you talking about like the kind of demonstrations that are not gonna reach anybody in Oslo anymore, or were
no,
you?
I mean I'm talking that it's saturated. That whoever has ears in Oslo by now has been deafened by how many demonstrations has been done. We have at least 2 or 3 demonstrations a week.
Hmm.
Some of them are huge compared to the size of Oslo. So anybody who lives in Oslo already knows about Palestine and already chose a side. If they're still Zionists, then like they're after seeing all this and they're still Zionists, I think it's too late. But outside of Oslo, a lot of people are not informed.
Hmm.
I'm talking here in terms of information, or let's say impact of not just information. Maybe some people know, but kind of forgetting that it's still going on. But here, people cannot forget that it's still going on. I believe. But outside of Oslo, no. Outside of Oslo, people live in their bubbles. They can't escape it, basically.
Mm.
I mean, we can also touch on the reason why even in Oslo and in Germany, in Norway and in Germany, you have this something that you mentioned, which is like people don't want to stand out. People like conformity a little bit way too much in these countries, to be honest. And I think it has some kind of uh, deep connection to never being or never have been uh, a colonized, oppressed people in the sense of like you're losing everything because of a foreign entity. Um, but I mean, Norway even
Norway
less than
was
Germany. Yeah,
colonized, but it's sure not okay. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, but I don't know. Like I don't think. I think we still don't have the actual recipe to how much everything, to like what the ingredients are. Um, but I think we each have our own role and each have our own capacity of like creating the things that we want, or like pushing the things that we want changed. I think it's also part of the reason why we have this stream is like what we can do is we can offer this space to have conversations about the many different ways of organizing, and just with the knowledge that all of them are valid, and that neither of us like none of us can like specifically call out the recipe that is 100% functional, but yeah, we each have
But
an
I've
So
actually
we
ingredient in
wouldn't be
it.
needing this conversation.
well,
Hmm?
exactly, but I think and I think it's better that we don't put out necessarily a recipe, even as an idea. And this is another thing that we've talked about in the last few weeks, and that I mean, I mentioned to both of you. Um, People are looking for a recipe, not people like us who are really active in coming up, and iterating on trying to come up with things, but people who are just walking around Oslo wearing kafiyas and thinking that that's their duty. They want to be told what to do, and this is conformity. This is kind of the staying civilized and being followers ultimately. And I think what I've identified as more of what I think my role will be and should be is to say, no, I'm not giving you an answer. I'm going to say, here are things that you need to keep in mind. Here are things that you should consider in developing your own role and developing your own place in this. And that's why I think this whole Instagram nonsense of being a figurehead is nonsense. And that's why I think having heads of the movement and people who think that they're the brains behind this whole kind of operation is completely useless, because ultimately we do need more than a few people, and we need more than 20 people to come in with fresh ideas and to say, here's my proposed recipe. And by then sitting and critically thinking through it and trying different things out, that's how you ultimately kind of drive change. Like, I always get so much out of talking to Hamza, and like, I mean, out of talking to both of you, but even when we were prepping for this um, stream, that was the process where like really things started moving for me. And I started, yeah, coming up with the new new ideas for actions and recipes that I wanted to try out. So,
Yeah.
well, we're
Yeah,
at an hour.
we are actually, we're a bit over an hour. um any last words? Not in a threatening way, yeah. Not in a threatening way.
Speak now
um
or forever hold your peace.
mhm.
I mean, I guess the conversation keeps going, like, because this is not something that can be. can be agreed on, as Aaron like said, cannot be set in stone, as Rachel said. And yeah, I mean, this can keep going, but it's really it changes also from one day to another. We can't keep fixing. If we fix something now, it's gonna change in the next weeks.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an evolving thing, and it's an evolving struggle. But yeah, thanks guys for having this great talk, and hopefully we'll see you another time.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much for coming
coming.
on, Hamza. I just wanted to say we need more ingredients for this recipe that we don't know yet.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much, Hamza, for taking time to talk to us. I think this conversation could go on for literal hours.
To be
Uh,
continued.
yeah. But let's just we end it here. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for joining
Thank
too.
you everyone for
Really appreciate
joining.
you spending your Sunday evening with us.
Yeah.
And see you soon in Free Palestine.
Free Palestine. Yalla, bye bye.
people listening.